good to have you with us. Thank you very much for your time this morning. So as we just saw a little earlier, there were protests this morning in Reims. I imagine there are going to be protests in other parts of the country as well. I mean, how do you see this playing out in the next couple of days?
Well, it's going to be tricky for President Macron and more especially for his Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, because I mean, so far, they really went out of their way to avoid what we've seen yesterday, that is to say, the triggering of Article 49.3, which is very well known in France. It's almost an adjective in the French language to do a 49.3. I mean, it's been done before. It's something that the Constitution allows. Indeed, in the late 1980s, Michel Rocard, the former socialist prime minister, actually triggered it 28 times. So this is not new, but it means that lawmakers and members of parliaments feel completely cheated, if you'd like. I mean, the upper chamber voted for and approved the pension reform law, but there was no chance for the MPs to actually do the same or to oppose it. And you know, as a lot of things in France, there is likely to be backlash in the streets. The question is how much?
And Agnes, I mean, you mentioned there that it's a thing that's been used 100 times, plenty of times previously. But I do wonder, there's the political side of it and the fact that it feels undemocratic to people. But it's also because it's the pension reforms, isn't it? That's the thing that people are really concerned about. People in France are very fortunate to have that wonderful period in the later part of their lives where they do have great pensions. And many, I guess, would fear that that is under threat by these reforms.
Yes, they are very fortunate, and they probably don't realize how fortunate they are, because if they took some distance and looked elsewhere, their European neighbors, for instance, like in Germany or in Britain, retire at the age of 65, sometimes 66. So really that reform, which was watered down, for instance, from the age of 65 to 64, would just put France closer into line with its European neighbours. Having said that, pension reform is a very heated and passionate topic in France, probably because most people here, apart from very, very rich people, rely on state pensions. There is no such thing as private schemes, if you like, individual private schemes that you find in the UK or the US. So what you get after you retire is your income until the day you die. So, and it is something that is almost something that is emotional, passionate, and also that reform, I must say, was not communicated to the wider public very well. The real reason is that big deficits are building up, but instead of telling the French that and to take a pragmatic view and to talk about demographic pressure, the French government said that the reform was a fairer reform, which is probably not the case, not fairer than the system before. And so there was a clear communication failure from the part of Elizabeth Borne government. And indeed, there will be a no confidence vote. We'll see whether she wins that in Parliament, because if she doesn't, then off she goes and her government will collapse, meaning that President Macron will have to appoint a new Prime Minister and therefore a new government.